Hey guys, got an interesting game to share today where we have an interesting imbalance in material, and you need to know how to, I think with everything in chess, you need to know how to make whenever there's an imbalance, you need to make the most of how that imbalance might be in your favour, and you need to minimize how an imbalance might be in your opponent's favour. Okay, so in this game, I think we end up with a situation where I have 3 extra pawns, my opponent has an extra minor piece. Okay, and we're going to see how that impacts the game strategically. So let's go through it. So my opponent starts with this funny e3 Vant Kreuz opening, and I just go reverse London, okay, because d4's coming, bishop out, and we have a very, very standard London setup on my part. My opponent plays this quite tight position with his bishops just in front of his king and queen. I bring out my knight. Knight comes out here to attack my light squared bishop, and I just drop it back to g6, takes, and I take with the h-pawn, giving me a semi-open h-file. Bishop now moves for a second time, and because I've got 2 pieces attacking h2, I can just grab that, and now white attempts to trap my bishop in the corner. Okay, so what I decide here is queen c7. I mean, I had options of maybe bringing my queen round to defend the pawn, but really it would have only taken black, 1, 2 moves, 3 to capture. Yeah, it would have involved moving his king, 3 to capture, and for me it would have been 1, 2, 3 even to defend. So maneuvering the queen around that way doesn't really work. But I'm thinking queen c7, and then I can capture, the pawn captures, queen captures with check, king has to move, and I've got compensation there. Okay, so we have queen to e2, takes, 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 and now the queen blocks. All right, so we've got a situation where I've just sacrificed a minor piece. Now I won the h2 pawn, okay? So now material is equal. I've given up both bishops, my opponent has given up a knight and 3 pawns, right? So you can start to see the shape of the game. I've got more pawns, I've still got all my pawns on the board, right? My opponent's position is looking a little bit less solid in terms of pawns, but he's got the activity of having 2 bishops on the board, okay? So I decide to exchange queens and force his king to move. First thing, I want to keep his king in the middle of the board. I don't want him castling behind his remaining pawns because I'm going to have some trouble breaking through there, okay? Because I don't have any bishops, I don't have a queen, so I'm short on long-range pieces. I've got 1 rook, that's my only long-range piece, okay? So we have rook to h1, and I start to maneuver my knight round. Bishop here, and there's just some general maneuvering. I'm wanting to protect my pawns. There's a check, reinforce with the pawn. So now what I need to do, because the imbalance in the game is my opponent has more pieces, okay, and has this bishop pair. My strength, on the other hand, because these imbalances quite often come with pros and cons, double-edged, okay, my advantage is that I have all these pawns. Now, with these pawns, what I need to be doing to press my advantage is to push the pawns up the board and try and deny my opponent's space in which to move his pieces. The other thing is as well that with bishops, it's possible, particularly when you've got 1 bishop, you can just put all your pawns on the wrong colour, right? And the bishop can't attack them at all. Or you can put all the pawns on the same colour as the bishop and try and just trap the bishop in a corner of the board. So there are options here. Okay, we have knight in, attacking these 2 pawns. I kick the knight, knight moves, I defend the pawn, and so on. So now we trade off knights, and I protect that knight there. Pushing a pawn again, you see. So now you can see what I've got here is a very solid, light squared structure with 6 pawns. Now that makes this bishop, this light squared bishop, pretty impotent in the game. He literally cannot get around the board. There's nowhere he can go, right? All these squares are covered, right? You can't go to there. Okay, so this bishop is very, very bad now. This bishop, on the other hand, is not so bad. I mean, it can move through my pawn structure, but then white has these dark squared pawns in the middle of the board as well, so they are hampering the bishop to some extent. So I want to keep a lot of pawns on the board, because the more pawns there are, the harder it is for bishops to maneuver. But my knight can waltz around the board in the way a knight does. Okay, so we'll see how the game goes. I now occupy the only open file on the board, which is important. King comes across, and now I push g5. So this takes away all of these squares from the king. So the king is going to struggle mightily to get forward in the game. This is important. Bishop comes back. I check the king. King now moves back to the second rank. Now it's going to be very hard for the king actually to get up the board even more. Okay, so now I attack this bishop. So I thought about maybe rook here. The king has to go back there to defend that bishop. So it's one of those attacks that, yes, it's an attack, but it's not really making your position any stronger. Just pushing my opponent back to the back rank. What's the point in that, right? This, however, I thought I'll attack the bishop this way, and then should the king, for example, decide to go and defend the bishop, then I can bring in my rook. Maybe have two attackers against it. So white thinks that's not a good idea and decides to swap off my knight, and I'm very happy to see this because I now capture here. So I've got this big pawn advantage here. I've got 5 pawns on the king side of the board against white's 1. 5 on 1. Okay, so f4 could come. Yeah, lots and lots of ideas. Rook to here, maybe. King moves, f4 takes, and then I've got 3 pawns in a row. Right, this is starting to look good. The material, remember, is equal at this point in time. White has this extra bishop, but that bishop is pointless. It's got no options right now in the game. Okay, now I start to bring my king up. White brings his king back behind the rook. I bring my king up, and now white proposes a trade of rooks. Now, key point in the game. I want you to look at the board. Okay, now should I exchange rooks at this point? If so, why? If not, why not? Okay, and I actually sent my opponent a message at this point, which is a quote from The Matrix, very early on in the film, where Agent Smith says to the police lieutenant says something like, I think my men can handle one little girl. And Agent Smith goes, no, Lieutenant, your men are already dead. So I sent him the message, no, Lieutenant, your men are already dead. Because I figured that after this, white's position is gone. That was a strategic blunder. And here's why, right? I've got this huge pawn advantage here. Okay, so it's not going to be too difficult for me to press that home. Okay, but more than that, I notice my king can come straight, for example, to this square, right? C2. I can get my king to C2. This bishop cannot defend that pawn, right? It can't go here. It's game over, and just see how quickly the game actually finishes now. I get my king into D3. Bishop retreats, I go here. Now he can't defend that pawn. Pushes, right? Just push a pawn. Okay, and this is a walk in the park. This is so easy now, right? Grabs a pawn, too little, too late. I'm going to get a queen. It couldn't have been an easier finish from that point on. So my opponent really, really should not have given up his only decent piece and left himself with this crippled bishop, right? Because of all the pawns on the board. So let's just go back to that position now, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of moves, but this is a walk-in from this point, right? This is a huge strategic error on my opponent's part, okay? should not have offered the trade of rooks. I will take black over white any day of the week at this point, even though material is equal. Let's just quickly look at the game report from move 35. I bet you it's got me like five pawns up or something like that. Okay, let's go move 35. Okay, after king takes, wow, okay, it's got black 0.3 up. But for me, this is a win. This is all day win. So maybe a computer would have done a different job on this. I don't know. Bringing the king in. Now I'm 3.7 pawns up. Still, and now 5 pawns up. So there you go. Just a couple more moves, and it's got black as completely dominant. So yeah, a computer might have made a better fist of that situation, but to me, it just looked like that was, you know, game over from that point, and indeed it was. So there you go. So the point of this is to start to develop the feel for the game, right? You need to be able to spot those imbalances. So the imbalance here was I had more pawns. So I want to steer the game in a direction where my pawn advantage can be more useful. My opponent had an extra minor piece, so I wanted to steer the game in a way that made his minor piece less useful by trading off where I could, leaving him with this awful bishop that was like little better than the pawn, really. And that just led to a very straightforward finish and a very straightforward win. So there you go. Spot and identify the imbalances in whatever game you're playing, and then seek to make the strategic direction changes to maximize those imbalances in your favor, minimize them in favor of your opponent, and there you go. You'll do better. Okay, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I'll see you soon.